and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duva, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man best described as a riddle inside a mystery, wrapped in a puzzle and enshrouded in an enigma,
Tim Longo. X.
Hey, how you doing, buddy?
Good. What? So that is a JFK reference?
Oh, it is not, in fact.
It's not?
No, it's Winston Churchill.
Oh, did they take that from Winston Churchill for JFK?
They may have, because
Joe
I'm
Pesci?
pretty sure it goes back to it's how he describes Russia, basically. Like what Russia's going to do in World War II is like, we don't really understand the Russian mind.
Oh, God, I'm so...
riddle. Yeah, it may have been... I'm sure it has been... It's certainly been quoted many times.
Well, that was... so that just goes to show how learned I am not, and you are, because my reference is Joe Pesci's speech in JFK, the movie, by Oliver Stone, where he says that.
Oliver Stone would certainly know.
Yeah.
I'm sure that is known, like it's meant to be.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, especially with the Cold War feel of all of it, it's a callback, yeah, and Oliver Stone. Yeah, anyway.
Of course, we've got our own Russia problems these days, but let's turn aside from that and into a different sort of thing, which is a mystery wrapped in a puzzle and a shrouded in enigma, and that's Half-Life. We're on our third episode discussing it. I actually managed to catch up. Last time, we didn't actually give the homework assignment in the cast. I did tweet it out so that, if people who are following along, if they follow us on Twitter, also knew. But yeah, we basically tried to. I both caught up, with the work I hadn't done yet, and
you played a lot.
I played, and then played up through Lambda Core, which I almost got to the end of. I'm very, very close to the end of that, and we might talk a little bit about the.
Yeah, we'll hit that.
Puzzle that's
I want to talk about that.
We'll
yeah, the end of that section, once you get to the core itself and the teleporting and stuff. It depends on how quickly you figure it out, I guess, because it is sort of a puzzle that I got stuck on a little bit. But we'll talk about that next time.
But mostly, I think what we're going to focus on this time is a lot of stuff having to do with level design. Because playing it again, one of the things you talked about in prior episodes was how this was meant to be. A fully immersive environment, that this was meant to be like a real place, and it really fully commits to that. And I was surprised playing it again at the variety of level design and level design techniques and environments and mechanics. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here.
Yeah, this is also something that you suggested we talk about, which I think is a great topic to hit for this particular game. This was in an era when I was coming up through level design as a designer myself, where because the teams were smaller and the development cycles were hypothetically shorter and things were lower fidelity, right? The level designer actually had. For better or for worse, almost complete control over the geometry and the flow of the level, right? And the way that the architecture was actually built. And usually, what you would have is you probably have like a technical artist that would work with you, kind of like grease the wheels, and then you would have, rather than these days where you have an environment artist who's doing like the hyper detail on the environment arts, and then what we would do now is block out the level in gray box or white box or block out whatever your words are for your team. And then the environment artist would come in after it's blocked out. From a flow perspective, the environment artists come in now, today, and they beautify it, right? They make it look awesome. And something that level designers couldn't do. But back then, we didn't have environment artists, really. We just had texture artists. And you would make the geometry, as you can see when we're playing this game, very simple. And then the textures are really telling you most of the story of what the sense of place is. And...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one of the things about it, from a technical perspective, is that, and I looked this up a couple weeks ago. This is, as we talked about, a Quake engine game, and so therefore it's using a binary space partition and all the tools are around editing that. That's stuff that we were still using in Republic Commando, so it's pretty familiar to us. Although in Republic Commando we tended to use it just for visibility testing and not as much for the geometry of the level, because that was kind of the thing that was changing from this point on out, is that more and more actual geometry would get built separately, and started us along that road of having specialists who come in and actually take the shapes that a level designer has made and make them look like things that would appear in an environment.
Yeah.
But at this point, it was just like, I'm going to carve out a hallway, and some walls and the ceilings and all this. I'm just going to kind of carve that stuff out, and I'm going to make the play out of that, and then somebody else would come in and just basically paint it, more or less. I mean, not really quite to that degree. It wasn't individual painting, but.
Well, in the loop for me, when I was a level designer, and I don't know how they would have done it at Valve if it was the same person or not, but I would also be, the level designer would typically be placing the textures as well. They would work and request and ask for textures or they would just look at a library of textures that are available and kind of piece things together, or they would make special requests. So usually the level designer was also the one putting and it depends. Everyone was a little bit different, but the point of the story for me is really just that in this era, when you look at, say, a Doom or a Quake or even maybe a Duke Nukem, there definitely was some sense of place, and the level designer had the same job and kind of like fully essentially arting and architecturally putting the levels together. But the goal that they gave themselves in Half-Life, clearly, as we're playing through, especially this middle section that we're going to talk about today, they also had the extra burden of making convincing spaces, right? And kind of logistically sound, a logistically sound world. And, when one note I put down was specifically for I forget what the level name was, but the processing plant where you're going through
residue
vats.
Processing.
Yeah, residue processing. On paper, that is not a cool concept for a level. You know what I mean? True. It's why, that's not something you would put in, say, a Quake level, right? And Quake levels, they had some sense of place, but they tended to be a little more abstract and, not really a specific place every step of the way. But this was trying to put things in this Black Mesa facility that would make sense to be there. In the macro sense, so
or that at least you could tell yourself a story that made them make sense, right? I mean,
they weren't perfect, but they tried.
Exactly.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off there.
No. I mean, the thing about the residue processing is some of that stuff is stuff that I referred to even in that initial monorail ride in. That's okay. Just put that anywhere. That monorail in, you see some of these elements. And it's sort
of foreshadowing.
It foreshadows the sort of environments you might run into. We talked about that leaking vat of green goo, and of course that's going to be all over this game, and in particular in residue processing, which was basically the next thing I think after Blast Pit. But yeah, I mean, just as this game, it's funny. I sort of feel like and this is a big kind of philosophical point, I feel like we've gone further and further down the road of Half-Life, for the most part in AAA development, where we're trying to make these realistic spaces that make sense and connect together. And, I sometimes feel like it's a lost opportunity for things that are abstract and don't make sense.
It is.
That computers are really good at, right? I mean, that we can't, you could go visit a location in the world, in theory, that fits together like Black Mesa does, but you can't go and do that level that you did for Infernal Machine, because it's it's non-Euclidean geometry. It doesn't work in our world, right?
Yeah.
It's literally physically impossible. And I mean, for me, I actually am kind of more interested in those sorts of spaces. But, I mean,
it's sort of why to some degree, it's why people play games, right? There is that chase of that pursuit of the photorealistic and kind of fully realized places that we still have today. But to some degree, people play for escapism, right? So they want some of that fantasy and science fiction that you're talking about. Then the other, this is a big topic. I could do multiple podcasts just about this. But the other interesting thing that comes with this conundrum that actually happened over the course of, I would say, game development from a historical standpoint, specifically level design, is you did have people like me, and I'll fully just use myself as an example and call it out, that came up through this level design era where there was this sort of full control over the flow of a level. But most of the time, we were not trained in architecture. We were not trained in art or composition or lighting or all these sorts of things, right? So, and then the other thing to your point about but then we had to make this transition, or somebody had to make this transition where you actually are starting to make real worlds that do need to architecturally make sense. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I think Half-Life did, to your point, kind of, it was the genesis point or the fork in the road of us thinking differently about how we're going to make levels in shooters specifically, but in a lot of spaces. I think I wanted to talk a little bit about System Shock too, to kind of full circle this, because I think there's some influences and stuff. But
well, yeah, and I mean, I think that one of the influences we started to have at this time were amusement parks. As far as sight lines and what are you going to see when you come around this corner, and what is it going to entice you to do? Of course, that's the whole goal of an amusement park design, is to constantly have that thing, that you see over the horizon that you're like, oh, that looks really cool. Oh, look, there's Space Mountain. Oh my God, we're going to go there, right?
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of that going on in Half-Life, and I do remember this being an era where we started to talk a lot about those things. It had kind of evolved from multiplayer maps, where the design conundrum was okay, well, we want to have spaces that reconnect, which is another thing we're going to talk about, so that you have the players constantly getting thrown into a scrum with one another. But you also want to have places where you can see someplace where somebody else might be, right? And to have landmarks for it to identify those when you come across them later as you traverse the level. Mm-hmm. So all this stuff was just this huge melange of what was going on in level design at the time.
We were still figuring it out. We didn't know. I think every company and every new shooter was trying to figure out what the rules were, and I think even the ones that would hit upon it, like some of the most famous, say Quake or Unreal levels that, at the time, and knowing some of those guys that designed those levels, they didn't know that their level was going to be one of the most classic levels of all time, right? They were just grassrootsing it and just doing what they think is right. But the interesting thing that I wanted to add in, as the kind of the history of this process progressed, is that to your point of chasing those realistic spaces, and your point about going to a real world place and then making a level out of that real world place, that doesn't guarantee that it's going to be fun. So you have this weird problem that we still struggle with today, of a sense of place and a sense of, and there is, to be honest, often a hard tension between art and design in this regard, because obviously artists want to make something that's beautiful, looks appropriate, architecturally sound, and they should, right? That should be their goal. But at the same time, the blockout for the level may not fully make sense as a such and such installation, but it plays really well. Right. So you have this weirdness where, I want to make the Eiffel Tower, but the Eiffel Tower isn't fun to play as a level, So working through that process has been really interesting. But in the Half-Life era, because it was kind of generally one person was guiding the whole vision of that level, maybe there was some more cohesiveness and kind of you kind of could define it all as you went. And this game was a revelation on, I could have fun in a processing plant, and there could be puzzles and conveyor belts and all sorts of stuff in a processing plant. And it made some sense, but the willing suspension of disbelief was small enough to where I didn't have to worry that much.
Right, you also have lots of threats to deal with, right? So that you're constantly distracted from thinking about, does this make any sense at all? I mean, that's often the goal of blockbuster movies is just throw so much stuff at you that your brain doesn't have time to catch up to but it doesn't make sense that the spectacle is meant to kind of overwhelm you to a certain degree. And I wouldn't say that's exactly what's going on here. It's more that you can get away with more,
right?
Because you're not focusing on. Wait a minute,
Yeah. Well, there was just enough.
It's like you can imagine a game being made today, which kind of pokes fun at some of these levels in a Galaxy Quest kind of way, like. Who set this up this way? This doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and to our point about getting more architecturally and realistically sound as we go. The other funny thing about that is, as the farther you go down that road and the closer you get to achieving that, the more that the player is going to expect it to be a real place and feel like a real place.
Right.
And that builds this tension between that and is it actually fun to play?
Right.
And those are two different things. And so, again, there's this weird kind of schism between those goals.
What was the thing that every person would do as soon as they got the level design tools for Doom or Quake? If you got what is it, Radiance,
Radiant.
You pick that thing up and you'd make your neighborhood or your house or your whatever, and you'd make some environment that was super familiar to you, just to be like, oh, this is cool, I can do this, and then you'd play it and you'd be like, oh, this is terrible. Why would I play? Of course, all kind of stopped with Columbine. Nobody was making real spaces like that anymore.
Oh, yeah, wow, yeah. My sort of semi-funny story about that is on Mysteries of the Sith, one of my multiplayer maps that I built was the Lars family homestead from Tatooine. I just thought it would be hilarious to make the homestead on Tatooine a multiplayer map, and it was not easy to make fun. It's and I had to take some liberties and stuff, but it's it was a super nerdy, geeky choice. But I don't think it played that well. So
I would expect nothing less of you. That's the nerdy part.
Yeah.
Let's get down to sort of the brass tacks. We kind of danced around Blast Pit a little bit last time because that was basically where I was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it is, of the levels that I played this time, it's the one I definitely remembered the most. So it's probably a good place to start.
Yeah. Do you have the level list in front of you? I
do. We had started last time. Yeah, we basically started last time with We've Got Hostels, and we've covered that pretty solidly. And then the next thing is Blast Pit.
Yeah. So Blast Pit. There's Power Up
on
rail. Yeah. I feel like there's, and I think you made this point in pre-show. I don't remember all the the entire levels of the entirety of these levels, but there's key moments and themes they talked about last time. I just really applaud their commitment to a theme per level and really going to the hilt with that stuff. But yeah, Blast Pit, everyone remembers the tentacles and this kind of concept of a mini stealth section.
Right.
But how you ended up killing it and getting into the side routes and all of the different. God, I'm actually having a hard time remembering on the spot right now. Because I played it a couple weeks ago.
Basically, you come in and there's you have to turn on three things.
Of course.
Power, coolant, and air or something like that. There's basically three elements. Two of them you can basically get to in one go. On one level, you have to go into this area where these three big tentacles, Cthulhu-esque tentacles, are kind of banging around. There's the audio puzzle there, you have to be quiet, but, make them attracted somewhere else. You have to, throw grenades or something. And then you go and first you get the first couple elements working.
And they're each on a different level, right?
Right, they're each in their own area. So you come down, but it's a connected thing where you
have to come back.
Go down. Yeah, you go into this room with these this huge open room with a central pillar, and you go across these bridges to get to the section where this thing that you need to do is, and there's two of those basically.
Yeah.
On each level, and one is the two, and which has this big fan that ends up blowing you up into an area to make your way back, and then the second is the one that really frustrated me, which was where you have the electrical rods that have to come out of this.
Oh, yeah. You started talking about that, yeah.
Yeah, and that was the thing that just drove me back. Because there's just so many ways it's trying to kill you that it reminded me in a way of, like, I don't know if you ever played the text adventure game, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
I don't even think I finished it, but...
That is a game where it's constantly trying to kill you. And that's part of the joke. Like, that's part of the fun and the humor of the game is, like... But there's a section of that game where you're trying to get the babblefish to put in your ear. And it's like this, like, 8-part puzzle, but you have to do it exactly right. Per, each time you get to type something in, you have to do the right thing. And so you keep failing and keep failing while you try to figure that section out. This reminded me of that. Yeah. Because it's like I had to remember, okay, don't go in the elevator, because that'll kill you. So you have to jump out to this ladder and then climb down the ladder, and then you have to go on this thing, but don't climb up too fast because this thing will kill you. And then make sure you move over, but don't jump out in front of it because it'll kill you again. Just these many, many steps of, like, I have to remember all the things that are going to kill me. And I'm going to have to re-encounter them again and again and again because they will kill me, because I'll forget, because it's because of that propulsion that we were talking about, like that there's a... You gotta get moving. Like, the electrical rods start coming out, and it's like, oh, I have to get down this ladder quickly because then there's going to be the electricity. That was the thing that killed me last time.
And I think the unfortunate thing playing this game in this day and age is that the movements and jumping mechanics are not strong enough to really support that kind of gameplay. And no spoiler, but warning, with the Lambda Core, you have some stuff ahead of you that will probably frustrate you.
I can vaguely remember that.
It's pretty rough. And I was dense in figuring a certain part of it out that I'll talk about next time. But yeah, I guess, like, the revelation for this game and for me, and Blast Pit is probably the first really good example of this, is... And we talked about it last time, but as a connected world level design structure where they had this engine that was loading these levels in, I guess
chunks,
bidirectionally, you could go back and forth versus, say, Quake, Doom, Duke, right? It was always forward momentum, right? Like, you were going through a level linearly, you would finish that level, and then you would load the next level, and that's not the case here once you're inside of an episode. But this concept of constantly coming back to this boss monster that was very memorable and iconic, and it had this slightly different mechanic with the stealth thing, which wasn't great too, but they were stretching their mechanics. But you're constantly reminded of what you're doing, Right. And everything was like this hub and spoke was coming off of this room, and just was like, and then when you finally get it, this kind of sense of completion, And I think, don't you go down through where it dies?
Do. Yes.
So it's like, it's even more gratifying because you actually get to go to a place where you were forbidden to go, which was where it was.
It makes sense for why you had to even deal with it in the first place.
So good. Yeah.
There's no other way around, you know. And I had forgotten that part of it. Because I actually got to the point where I killed that, and I'm like, well, now what do I do?
Yeah.
I've gone all the other places I can. Oh, there's this big hole in the ground.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
I could go in there.
Some of the best level design, good. I have so many notes for this game, and obviously shooters are in my blood, so I probably have a lot more to say, but I would love to just teach a whole class on just Half-Life or something. It's just so much. Every level there's something to learn. We won't have time to go through it all. But
I honestly was thinking, as we were playing it, I was thinking, this might be the thing that you take away from this podcast where you're like, maybe this is what I take back to my designers.
Yeah.
And it was like, find that core idea and keep revisiting that core idea over the course of your level.
Well, and committing to it. But yeah, that's the other thing, is the interesting thing about this era, and we've talked about this probably on most of the series that we've done, but it was cheaper to do these one-off focuses, right? Like, where you could focus on a thing, and it's so expensive and challenging to do that kind of thing for every level and not reuse things and not kind of, it's not an excuse per se, but it's just more challenging.
Even 5 or 6 years later, when we're working on Republic Commando, we cut that like Rancor style boss. We had a really big boss that we wanted to have.
Oh my god, I totally forgot about that.
We were only going to be able to use it that once. Like,
Yeah.
It was going to be on the Wookiee planet,
Kashyyyk. Come on.
And so it was going to be on that Wookiee planet, but there was we had to have all this space, and we were only going to have this one thing. It was going to be really large, bigger than a Rancor, actually. It was going to basically have these big arms that are going to sweep into the space, and we just ended up saying, you know what, the effort we put into that would be effort. You'd see this one time.
Yeah, it's tricky though because
but it might have been memorable.
It might have been memorable, and it's a production call. We talked a lot about modularity on that game as well, right? And that still is something we talk about today. And anytime you need to do that stuff, but also it's tricky. You want to have those memorable, unique spaces too. So,
right.
yeah. I mean,
it's tough
as far as other themes.
Always.
Oh yeah, for sure. And they just didn't have to make that same kind of decision in this day and age. But
right, when you can carve out your level geometry, in a few hours, and be roughed in and be like, okay, and be like, and now I'm 90% of the way there.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a huge difference. They would talk about. I've certainly heard John Romero talk about how in the Doom days they could do a level in a day. That they could do the layout for a level in a day. And granted, that level would go through iteration and be made more fun. But they could, if they wanted to do that, they could just do that. This game I think was, Quake era. I think that was stretched out to more like a week, for a Quake like style level. But it was still not a lot of time, and so you had a lot more time for your game. Your gameplay programmers or what have you, or just scripting, to go in and figure out how to make all this weird stuff work.
Yeah.
These different variant sorts of gameplay work. So.
Well, now often we have different people doing all of those things separately. So it's even more dispersed and harder to keep on track. But
yeah, and a huge production problem just to track it all.
Yeah.
Because if it's the same person doing two different, critical weird things that are a core, thing for a particular level, now you've got a real push me, pull you problem between those two levels.
Yep.
If this person's going to spend their time over here, then I'm not going to get the time, to make my level special. And it's a huge difference these days.
A couple of quick things. I'm looking at my notes on Blastpit specifically. I wanted to mention some just minor stuff just to call out. I loved the scale of the sections of Blastpit where you go into sort of those really big open kind of vat areas with bridges and stuff. It was just they hadn't hit that scale yet in the game, and that was really kind of cool. And
it sort of feels like the end of Empire, where they're in that
totally
fighting over that big wind tunnel thing or whatever in Cloud City. Yeah, really, really good scale, and of course I fell there a lot, so I appreciate it.
Well, so my other little tidbit of a thing that I wanted to call out to your point about falling on those bridges. I don't know how you went about it, but the way that the object and enemy placement was, when you first enter one of those big areas and you see the bridges, there's actually enemies on there. And if you take those enemies out from a distance, which most people probably do because they want to get the upper hand, it actually is, say you use the exploding barrel or whatever.
Right.
It'll blow the bridge up that you need to cross later. Yeah. But you don't know that at the time, and so it's a missed opportunity to actually teach the player that that's a choice. But at least it is an example of some early giving the player meaningful choices on how to interact with something. Get the advantage by blowing up the barrel, but then there's a risk reward of that, So little kind of nice little moment there that maybe unintentional, because I was bummed that you didn't know that until you found out later, but. If you would have thought about it, I guess you could have, but
I did for the lower one. I shot. There were some explosive crates behind the enemy that I shot instead of shooting the things that were on the bridge, so you could actually kill the enemy
and save the bridge
in the same way and save the bridge.
Yeah, that's cool.
Which I was very glad of at the time because I saw what I would have had to walk across, and it was basically a tightrope.
Oh, it was super rough. Yeah, I blew up all the bridges. But the fact that you could make that choice. And think about it, right? That makes you feel much smarter as a player in a very simple way. So some good little lessons there that I made note of. But then I guess, moving on a little bit, we don't have to talk in detail, but with Power Up and on a rail, those are also in my mind. At least the boss of Power Up was very memorable to me. I remember that tunnel area and having him kind of stomping around up there throughout the level, like the vague memories of that. The details of the actual puzzle itself is, you're just flicking more switches and turning things on. But to the point of like connected levels and having this kind of cohesion to the world, one of the challenges that level designers run into with that, and we still have this problem today, of order of operations of teaching the player what the connectedness of the world is compared to your objectives. And Brett and I both, it sounds like, we went and dealt with the powering up of things before we found out what we were powering up, because the level is in the player's hands as far as how to explore it. And so neither of us actually went and found the place where you can electrocute the thing before we powered it up. So I actually got stuck for a while. I was like, okay, I powered it up. I went back down there, back up, back down, looking for the thing I had missed. And it turns out I just didn't go down that one part of the tunnel to find, where you electrocute the guy. And that was because of the way that I played the level. And so it was great that it's connected and everything's cohesive, but also there comes a cost with telegraphing that to the player, when they haven't seen where their actual objective is before they've actually found the key. Of course, that's a usability problem. So
yeah, and I feel like that's a lesson they learned and applied to Half-Life 2, because I feel like that's a lot less common in Half-Life 2.
They got way better at it.
But it's also to the detriment, though, of having these spaces that feel like you can tackle in multiple ways and things like that. So there's,
Well, yeah, and I think, even in this case, right, they could have just, from your earlier point about landmarking and telegraphing and composition and line of sight and lighting, they could have done a better job having that be a present thing somehow in the background to remind you of it. Even if you didn't go physically to that room, maybe there could have been ways. And the thing is other levels in this actual game where they do a better job at that.
Yeah,
early on in like the office level or whatever, I forget exactly which level it is, but you come through a door and you see like a guard post inside a window you can't get into, and there's a switch in there, and they present it to you right away. Turns out it takes you probably 30 minutes
it's to get you to Blast Pit, actually.
Oh yeah, right. Okay.
And you end up making your way all the way back around, and you go into that room, and you're like, oh, I can just hit the button and open the door.
Exactly. Yeah. So
that's the rocket testing, and
I think that's a good example.
Really good. Yeah, a much better example of doing that well, for sure.
Yeah,
definitely.
And then on a rail, I just also had a fond memory, and still, it just enjoyed another type of interaction where you're kind of getting on and off and on and off, and it's a little confusing at times because it's hard to know where you were. Sometimes I got confused with the track layout, but just at least a novel idea.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I found I actually didn't have much problem with that.
Well, you're smarter than I am, so.
No, I think it was more that I just made the assumption that they just wanted me to flip the tracks
every time.
That was fun to do, right? Like, oh, I get to do a little marksman shooting here. I can, shoot the bottom of this thing. It's just it's a total fun thing to do. To shoot and switch the tracks on a train. That is just like it's like one of those little moments from a movie where you're like, oh, that's cool.
Oh, totally, yeah.
And so just doing that naturally takes you to the solution. Or takes you where you need to go.
My problem is I second guess myself because I'll shoot it and switch it, and I'm like, oh wait, no, I don't want to shoot. I don't want to do that yet. I want to see where
where does it go? Yeah,
and then I confuse myself. So, as usual, making it harder on myself than I need to.
There was one point where I actually accidentally fell off the back of the thing. This actually was great. It was my favorite moment in this level. There was that area where you have like the big electrical discharges going over the top of the track, so that if you take the train through it, you'll get electrocuted. So I think the theory is you ride forward till you get to where it is, and then you time yourself to go into the gap in between, right?
Yep.
Here's the way I did that. I started going, and then I accidentally jumped and fell off the back of the train.
Yeah.
And now I was on the track, but I was between the rail and the wall, the third rail or whatever, the electrical rail in the middle. And I just crouched and walked all the way through that. And stood up on the other side and waited for the train car to come around a second time.
That's great.
And just hopped on. It was perfect. It was so... Because then I could just shoot, it's going to come here, and I can just redirect it to go the direction I actually need to go. And that was just a fun moment of I don't know if they knew that this was a possible solution to this problem.
Yeah.
But it felt really good. I felt really smart, even though it was accidental. Well,
they give you enough in this game, in this level design. They give you, and Half-Life 2 is the same way. They give you enough room to experiment. It's not open world. It's not like, say, a Deus Ex or something like that. But they give you enough to kind of just fool around with certain things, right? It's more kind of on a room by room basis rather than a macro basis. But you could see the inklings of sort of some of their overall Valve-ness, coming through in this early stuff that I think ended up defining a lot of what they do for at least these games.
So the other, I think the other big ones that we should probably hit level-wise are Apprehension, which has a good story moment, which I had entirely forgotten. And you wanted to talk a little bit about weapon stuff as far as that goes. So, and then I want to talk too about Surface Tension in particular.
Oh, Surface Tension, another good classic.
But wait, first, Apprehension is the one where you are, and this was funny because I literally was like, "Am I supposed to be apprehensive, or am I going to be apprehended?"
Right. What is the
it was
meaning?
Both.
Right.
That's the one where you, at some point, I don't remember exactly how it happens, but maybe you fall into a space. And your suit goes beep beep beep, and you basically get cold cocked and captured. Towards the end of the level, and you had made the point during pre-show is that basically gave them an opportunity to do a weapon reset. Take everything away from you, and also through that reintroduce you to the weapons themselves. You have this opportunity to be like, oh, now I only have the crowbar again, but there's other enemies I'm going to have to deal with that crowbar than I had to the first time. And that is a really interesting thing, and I'd forgotten about this moment entirely.
Me too.
I had no recollection. Literally didn't know what the level name was going to mean. So you can tell how much I forgot about it.
I totally forgot too. And so one of the common challenges that we have, especially in kind of a shooter in a semi-linear way like this, is the power escalation curve, right? Where you're basically, obviously you want to make the player more powerful over time. And, I guess maybe we'll find out if we get a guest on, if this was the reason they did it or not. It probably was just more for fun and drama's sake. But from mechanically, what it ends up doing is it helps you reset that power curve. And as you said, it puts weapons into back into a valuable resource, because at that time, probably most people have maxed out ammo and everything, right? So it makes things valuable again, and to your point, a pistol round is way more important to you. And then also, but the enemies have still progressed, right? So you're still fighting Marines, and you're still fighting,
right,
the powerful enemies that you've met up to this point. But now you have to be more clever because you have limited resources. And then the other thing that it did for me, whether it was intentional or not, is the only progression you have in this game is really your weapon progression, right? There's, as far as power progression, and so what it just enabled them to do is reset that. And as Brett said, you get to rediscover the weapons, but you kind of get to experience that leveling up, quote unquote, though it is very light, over again by, oh yes, the crossbow, finally I got that weapon again. I love that weapon. I found another one. So they're kind of...
the other thing, too, is I think that this is the first time they introduced the hand cannon, right? The 6-shooter, the revolver.
It might be somewhere in there.
And one of the nice things about that is that you have another single shot weapon, but it's like for most enemies it's a single shot kill.
Yeah.
And what that means is that you're then, because you have very limited ammo in both your normal handgun, which is like a 9mm or something like that, but just kind of a normal handgun, not like this big, like maybe like a 22, I don't know,
like a Beretta or something.
Yeah, something not too crazy, a Walter PPK. You've got that on the one hand, and then they give you this hand cannon, which is like, you can imagine,
it's a Desert Eagle or something.
Yeah, Clint Eastwood with this thing, and and the nice thing there is that you have to make decisions about, like, how do I want to spend this limited ammo I have of both of these things. Like, I drop into a room, that's got a bunch of head crabs. Well, I want to have the 22 or whatever, the small pistol, because I'm going to take one or two shots with each of those things, but I don't want to waste a big hand cannon shot on those little annoyances. I want to clear a couple near me, maybe, and then switch to the crowbar, so that I can conserve the ammo for something that's going to come later. But then you run into one of those, squid face things, the four-legged creatures with the little grabby...
Spit at you?
Yeah, the ones the bull squid, I think is what it's called.
Yeah,
and it's like, okay, I want to use it on that. I want to use my hand cannon on that because they're, I want to take them down quickly, because they shoot at me from a distance, and I maybe don't have a lot of space to maneuver.
You're having to make better weapon decisions.
Yeah, making really good decisions, and at that point, having an opportunity to learn, like, this is the tool for this job. Which you've maybe lost track of because you've progressed up a power curve where maybe you've got a favorite weapon, or you're leaning on, like I find myself leaning on the assault rifle all the time.
Me too, yeah.
And in pre-show we talked about it. You were telling me how the crossbow is really efficient against the big brutes that have the sort of tentacles in their chest and they shoot the flies. And I had no idea because I've gotten used to, like, with those guys, this is the thing I do. If I have a grenade, I'll throw a grenade at them. I've used the environment sometimes against them, but mostly it's like, okay, I hang back, I pop and shoot and things like that. They are a pain. Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing too that I'd realized too late or later in my play session is actually the crossbow is only effective if you hit them in the flesh. They have armor on, and if you hit them on the armor, probably with any weapon, but with the crossbow specifically, I don't even know if it does any damage. So you have to, like, hit them in the belly or something, and it seems to go down in 2 shots. But so you brought up
that's a great risk reward mechanic. Right?
Yeah,
you have
it's basically
limited ammo with that thing, but you're risking that you're going to get in a shot on the flesh, which is difficult. The reward is you use less ammo. You can take them down 2 shots. You maybe can do it, by popping around a corner, so you're not super exposed. There's a lot of great variables at play.
Well, yeah, and the other interesting thing about that, which would be very intentional in the enemy design, is their back is armored. So when they're unaware of you, you would want to try to snipe them with, say, with the crossbow or something, but you can't. You have to alert them to actually use that weapon. So even though it's 2 shots, you know what I mean? You have to get them to turn around for it to be most effective. So that's just good, like, some good old-fashioned enemy design there.
Very good enemy design.
The other thing that you brought up that I wanted to mention related to the weapon progression stuff that probably not fully intentional, but it's a takeaway for me, a mini one, is every weapon, if you are, not every weapon, but many of the weapons, even the lower power weapons, tend to have a role to play throughout the whole game. And what I mean by that is, you mentioned the head crabs when you get, say, the Beretta or whatever back. Like, when you have a full ammo, when you're full up on ammo on, say, the pistol, it is a good weapon to take head crabs out at, but you're not going to use it on, take head crabs out with, but you're not going to use it on probably most other enemies. But it still for me at least, it still has a role to play because there's head crabs throughout the game.
Right.
Even though you're probably powerful enough to not worry about head crabs too much unless they're in great numbers. But I just, it causes me, or maybe even the crowbar, it causes me to go back to those lower powered weapons because they keep the mixture of enemies kind of consistent throughout the game.
Yeah, and that pistol actually uses the same ammo as the AK.
Does it? I didn't realize that.
There are a few. There's weapons that are linked in that way.
The radiation, or what's the
there's
experimental
the plasma thing, and then the one you get later, which
the
is a sort of circle. That's a really fun weapon to use because it's like, I just pointed at it and goodbye. So you have, it's interesting. This game actually later in the game gives you two weapons. You basically end up with two weapons that are infinite resource. One, of course, is the crowbar, and you have that the whole game. And you always, in a shooter, you always want to have something like that.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Because you need to be able to fall. The player needs to have a fallback position of, I'm out of resources. I don't want to have to reload as a result. So you have to have a gentle failure state of, okay, if all else fails, I've still got the crowbar or a knife, or in Republic Commando for us it was the recharging pistol. So it just recharges. You can always shoot it. I mean, it's slow. It's deliberately underpowered, but it's a weapon of last resort, and I think it was actually quite effective, very up close.
So it's a bit of an auto balance design. You need something in there like that. I want that segue to a health thing I want to talk about in a second.
Yeah, go.
Well, the to your point about always having that kind of tool for players, because you don't know what choices they're going what good or bad choices they're going to make with their ammunition. The thing that they don't have in this game, that you could arguably say Halo 1 was sort of the innovator, is the recharging health and or at least recharging shields to give you that buffer in Halo 1. But the trick with finite health, and I've gotten myself into a couple of places where I've had to save that I didn't want to go back too far. You could get into a point where there's no available health in sight, and you're pretty low, and you are kind of up against odds, and those are really hard to balance.
They are,
because not only are they do have health backs throughout the world, but their primary way to balance health is these are the wall units,
stations,
and those are also a cool little side note on those. Those are a cool little tension because you have to be engaged with them.
Look at them,
and so
you can't see what else is going on, so you have to rely on audio and things.
Build this tension. It's really nice little design there that we ripped off, of course, but yeah, it's just I just wanted to call out that they were smart in adding in some recharging weapons, but with the health they don't have that, and there's some really balance challenges with that choice.
Well, and I ran into one. I was down to, I want to say like the sort of 25 to 30 range of health, and no suit, and I went up that ladder that takes you where there's two Marines and a tank.
Oops,
and so I had that's fine. I had very little health, and I ended up just bowling my way through it, just doing it again and again and again.
Yeah. I think I was in a similar position. I ended up sneaking through that area because I had no choice, I think.
I mean, you pick up a ton of rockets below and stuff like that, so I just was able to kind of lean on that. I had 5 of them or whatever, and whatever the maximum you can carry is, and so it's like, I'm in a good position. But it ended up being like, okay, go up, and okay, can I get the Marines without losing health?
Yeah,
okay, good. Let me save again.
Yeah,
it's like, but I did it many, many times. Like, tried many things, and I feel like the enemies are a little bit random in that regard. Like, I would feel like I did the same thing but get a different result. Like, sometimes I would alert them and sometimes not, and I'm like, I don't know what I did that was different.
Yeah, it's not good.
It's not well told.
Sets, yeah. I mean, on the criticism side, I forgot to mention this in previous episodes, but I do want to call out that overall the shooting experience is... Or did we already talk about this? I guess
we talked about it a little bit, yeah. We talked about how shooters in particular need a really tight, very
not
good
great
loop. Yeah, and the motion and the movement in particular, I think.
The movement we talked about, but
yeah.
I just think that the trigger to hit, trigger to kill experience is not wonderful. I think the enemy tells and interactions and the animations on that side of the equation is good, but I don't know. I don't think the weapons are as gratifying as Quake was at this era, and the effects and stuff. I think could have been better, but to your point about like fighting Marines over and over again, I don't even using the assault rifle. I'm not even sure if things like headshots count or if any location based stuff's happening. I don't even know where my shots are hitting. I'm hoping, So there's just not a lot.
You basically the information it gives you is like decals behind them. Like if they're near a wall, you'll see blood against the wall, but it doesn't really help you. I tend to aim for the head because my expectation as a longtime player of first-person shooters is that's going to do more damage, but I don't actually know that.
Yeah, I stopped, and it doesn't seem to make a difference.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised that it doesn't. Well, they're also wearing helmets. Who knows?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Now. There's guys without helmets, too, so maybe we could experiment. But So surface tension, you want to talk about that real quick? That's another really memorable...
Yeah, memorable and painful. I did get lucky a little bit in that one. So surface tension is pretty soon after apprehension. It might be the next one. Is that true?
I think so, yeah.
That's a couple more. You have to go through residue
processing. Oh, that's before, yeah. Residue processing.
Something called questionable ethics, which I don't specifically remember. It's the testing facility with the laser that you charge to blow through a wall and go into the next thing.
I like that moment. That was a cool. That was like a. That is a. Like if you think about it, like you said, if you think about it too hard, it doesn't make any sense. But you feel like it's something you'd find in a science research facility. Where you're like, oh yeah, they would test a laser on this thing. Oh, I'm just going to move this box underneath. That's brilliant. I'm so smart.
Yeah, exactly. It's a total small moment, but it's great. It's a great little moment. It's like, oh yeah, these things that are in the world have multiple uses, right? I mean,
it's very sciencey.
Yeah, it does reinforce the sort of theming of the levels. But yeah, and then you need to do that to be able to get outside. Surface tension is one where you've been dealing with the Marines, but now you're dealing with their Air Force, basically, and you're moving around on the area above Black Mesa, which made me think of, like, I don't know, Los Alamos or something, because it's very desert.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much a desert. It's kind of like mountainous desert.
It's like New Mexico, Arizona,
something like that.
Southern Rockies, yeah. I mean, yeah, grand.
And this is when you first get the rocket propelled. If their rockets are, I guess they're guided rockets. Somehow you need to paint your target. I got extremely lucky. This was another area where I was very low on health.
Me too.
And I had to sneak through. There's an area where you have to go down this pipe.
Oh my god, that was the worst.
Yeah, and that's probably the worst moment in this whole level, because I would frequently die right after that and have to do it again, and I would fail again and again and again. There's this very steep pipe, it's like a 60-degree angle, so you basically have to kind of fight going down it too fast by pulling back, by backing up basically as you're going down, so you don't get up too much momentum and die when you hit the bottom. At the same time, it's rounded, so if you don't hit it straight on, you start sliding in one direction or the other, and you fall off and die.
Oh, it's so easy to...
Yeah, it's bad.
I didn't realize you could back down it, or,
No. I mean, you can't back down it, but you can, by holding down back up, you slow your descent.
I see. I didn't know that's... I just took the damage.
No, I was so low. I was at 20 at that point.
Oh, no.
I couldn't do it without figuring out a way. So,
that's rough.
Luckily, it afforded that. It was not.
Well, what's more, did you already mention that we're on the side of a cliff?
Yeah, we're on the side of a cliff. So if you miss, anything, you go flying and you die. It's just and all the cliff things are very narrow. There's a point later in this area where it's a jumping puzzle. I got so lucky though at the point where you actually are facing the helicopter. I walked out and it was right there, and I had the weapon loaded, and it was painted, and I just shot it.
Yeah.
Like, I remember originally playing this game and having to try to get this helicopter, a dozen times. And this time I just, like, walked out. I was like, oh, it's you. Bang.
In one shot?
One shot.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I think it was two shots for me, but
it was perfect.
That's awesome.
I mean, it felt really good. It was a moment of, like, pure what they call fiero, I surmounted the challenge.
Yeah.
And at the same time, immediately save. Because I don't have to do all of this again at, 15 health or whatever I'm at now. Because I've taken little bits as I've come down, from falling damage and stuff like that.
I just remember playing this level for the first time, and just when you come out on that cliff, and I don't know definitely other games must have done similar stuff, but I don't know, just this nice moment of vertigo and like kind of like, oh man, they're really doing this, and there are these, you're shooting at guys on lower cliffs and you're having to navigate. Again, the jumping and movement.
Jedi Knight did that stuff.
Jedi Knight had some great levels. Yeah, that's true. That's
levels
true.
Where there's a lot of verticality. And actually, as I recall, Jedi Knight was the first game I ever had. I have mild vertigo when I'm in, it's like a lot of people do. If you're near, high space, I definitely have that feeling of like, ugh. And
Jedi Knight did a great job.
Jedi Knight was the first game I had that ever happen to me.
That's cool. Jedi Knight did a great job at scale. Yeah. I think that engine really was good at doing that. Yeah, but and then I think the thing about this rocket launcher, which is a little bit iconic, and they had the same one in the same mechanic in Half-Life 2. Once you fire the rocket, you can put the laser where you want the rocket to go and guide it in midair. And that was kind of a novel thing at the time that most rocket launchers were not like that. So.
And they would. That was a sort of mechanic that would actually lend itself to cooperative play in tribes, for example, where one character would paint a target and another character would hit it. Mm-hmm. So they split that, which was a kind of interesting innovation that came along a year or two later. Where somebody took this mechanic that was one thing in Half-Life and made it two distinct roles. That one person was responsible for painting and another person responsible for actually, firing the big gun somewhere. I don't remember the specifics, but I feel like it was a mortar or something they had to put down, and somebody else had to be near the target, something like that. Which is a great sort of innovation. But this whole area is really a lot of there are minefields here,
and there's helicopters overhead the whole time.
Helicopters overhead. This is such a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
To your point from earlier in the episode, there's just here's a new mechanic. You have to worry about mines now.
Yeah.
And you basically end up shooting the ground ahead of you to figure out where they are. At least that's what I did. And then of course you've got all these Marines to deal with because they're all up there, and they've got little tents, those little camo tents that they use. That are
and then they mix in the tentacle creature, and then I hadn't realized that how the sandy rocky areas connect. It's kind of a big, it's like they're all the sections are connected. You can kind of go in a big circle, Right. There's crevices and stuff that are hard to see at first, but I was just really impressed with that. Kind of felt like a mini open world section in a way, because you could kind of explore it in any order, and there was kind of a mini puzzle to do there. But it was again a great sense of place, because you expected that you've been in this science installation underground this whole time. You'd expect this to be on top of it, above it, and you finally get to go there, But then, of course, there's helicopters everywhere, so there's a great no pun intended tension to that. So,
right. Well, and you also have this moment. This is where you start to see, and this will be our last topic because we're getting up on an hour, but. This is where you start seeing the world move more towards a blend of the alienness.
Yeah, right. Right.
This is, I think, the first time where you see like an alien. It sort of looks like a what are they called? Manta ray fly
That
overhead
was a good moment.
and drop down one of those aliens. Yeah. And you're like, what the hell was that? You don't have a moment to think about it because you're under fire again. And then a jet streams by as well, and you're like, oh my God, there's two Air Forces at work here, and one of them I've never seen before. So it's a great moment. And in pre-show you talked about how you start to see more of this as the game goes on, but I think this is the kind of inception of it.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, I'm blending with this something else at this point. Mm-hmm. Something's breaking through.
Yeah, there are more and more coming. You see like these. You get to this point where there's these these jump pad things that are weird alien grotesque stuff, and there's eventually like these kind of mucus door wall things that you can blow up. And then we haven't even talked about like all the different alien weapons that start coming in, including the little grenade guys that were a revelation at the time. Like these little guys that you throw, but if they don't blow up or do their job, they're going to come after you. So you have to.
I don't have those.
Oh no! Really?
Yeah, I don't know where you get them.
Okay, so
I know that you fight them.
You fought some of them then, right? The little guys that run after you.
You have to fight them. There's a couple places where
they
come and they run at you really, really fast.
I remember that. Yeah, but you've gotten to that point. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So we're at the point where it doesn't matter, there's these. It's not very intuitive. There's these little like pod looking, pretty grotesque little round things on the floor. And they're kind of medium sized, and they're kind of pulsing they look like an organ. If you run over those, you will pick up these little guys. I guess they're weird. Like nests for these things.
Yeah.
And then they become part of your grenade inventory.
Oh,
and you probably remember, right, where you hold them in your hand, and the little guy's
and they kind of wiggle, and
he's looking at you. And, and he's like, he looks like.
I remember that, and I don't. But I didn't.
Yeah, bummer.
I couldn't connect that to. Like when that happened, or I don't remember distinctly. I just remember the experience of like, ew, I have this gross thing in my hand, and being able to use it, and I wasn't able to find picking those up. So I hope
I think it's just I think I accidentally ran over one of those things and then picked them up, and so I can see why you would not have, because it doesn't look like something you should run over.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
It looks like an enemy. But as far as like grenade design, like Hall of Fame grenade design in that sucker, because like so of course they're a little critter, right? So then when you throw them, just to break it down a little bit, then they will attack anything nearby, including you if there's nothing else. And then also, as soon as you throw them, their sound pitch begins, and it pitches up over time, slowly. And so the longer they are alive, the higher pitch it goes, and when it reaches its crescendo, they blow up. And so there's just all these little layers in how they work, but then they're a grenade. It's the best. And then you can shoot them. And then also they're an enemy, like you said. Sometimes they just have them come straight at you. Yeah. So, but just this influx of the alien stuff is just a really good signature thing. And just like the whole science theme, like I think the next level is something about your name, Gordon Freeman or something. Forget
Freeman or something like that.
Yeah, just like when you start meeting, before you get to Lambda...
Forget about Freeman, yeah.
Forget about Freeman. When you're on your way to Lambda Core, which we'll save for next time, but it's just some of the lines that the scientists, when you finally get up, reach some of them, they're just, the way they're talking about you is just hilarious, It's like, I didn't expect you to make it this far, and, oh, you must be Freeman, but you're sort of slowly building this legend of yourself, right? Both with the military... You have this 3-faction war going on with the aliens and the military fighting a lot with themselves, which is cool to watch. But I just love this kind of persona that you're building up just by surviving. And they really start paying that off really heavily. And
the writing there is so, in these little interactions you get a payoff of the sense of this being a larger place again, where you'll run into this guy and he'll tell you how they made him stay behind so he could open the door for you. Yeah. I drew the short straw.
And it's just a great moment of
I didn't want to do this. I'm no hero. I'm a total opposite of you, Freeman. I just want to get out of here, and
it's just thought through, right? Like rather than just having a random guide there, they decided to put a little backstory.
Yeah. No, it's really phenomenally done. I say we take a quick break and then come back to a little feedback.
Sounds good.
Welcome back from the break. On the cast, we like to read a little bit of feedback now and again. Each time, if we've got reviews from Apple Podcasts / iTunes, we like to read those. And if you have email, we don't have any email this time with questions, but if you have email with questions, you can send that to devgameclub@gmail.com. You, sir, have the first of our reviews from this time. We're catching up from a while back. We had a whole big push there, and we're slowly making our way through it. So, give us the first one from Michael Samiller?
Yeah, I was looking at that. I'm not sure.
That is your real name?
Yeah. Fresh and Unique by Michaels A. Miller. That's how I'm going to say it. Okay. I learned about this podcast from Kotaku Split Screen. If you enjoy listening to seasoned game devs talk about and dissect some of your favorite games after they play them, then this podcast is for you. My only minor complaint is that sometimes they'll say things that are incorrect. Mario... Yeah, exactly. No surprise there. Parentheses, Mario 64 did not come out in 1994. Or sometimes your inner fanboy will want to scream when they don't know certain things about your favorite games. Totally understand. I do that all the time myself when I'm listening. And then Jill is also the girl in the blue shirt. I'm not sure. Is that a Resident Evil?
It's a Resident Evil
thing, I believe, yeah. Don't know how we got that one wrong. But those things are really minor, and everything else makes up for it. Fantastic podcast.
Yeah. Well, when he said seasoned, I assumed he meant our salt and pepper hair. But yeah, well, thank you, Michael. Yeah, we try to get things right, but we're not we're not trying to hit the web while we're talking most of the time, and so if we've had time to really prepare, hopefully we got things right. Sometimes we're
guessing a few times.
Yeah, we're guessing like, oh, when was that? Sometimes it's just our faulty memories. So
getting Jill wrong is pretty bad, though. I don't know how we did that, but
that would be the sort of thing where I just don't know or care. So it's very possible that was something I said. Because
it is your main character.
I'm just not a lore dude.
Yeah,
I feel like we talked. I think it came up like at the very end of an episode about how in some other game in the franchise, and right. And I think that was the connection. So, but anyway,
referring to her as Jill talking about her.
We were playing the game, we were, but I think we just didn't remember if it was still Jill in this other game.
Yeah, right.
Anyway. I'm not trying to litigate. I just those are the sorts of things that we're just like off the cuff, make some observation. It's not super important. I have one from Dan Furno.
Nice.
Was that Towering Dan Furno I've heard of? Anyway, you don't even need to play along, he says. For me, the primary joy in listening to this podcast are the anecdotes and behind-the-scenes glimpses into the period of game development that coincided with my early gaming years. Guest interviews are always particularly enlightening as they find the people who aren't usually interviewed by the traditional gaming press. Yeah, we love the interviews too because they're enlightening to us. They're always so much fun to do. Thank you, Dan Furno. We don't necessarily feel like people have to play along, or at least not even have to play along at our pace, right? If there's a game you'd like to play along with but don't have the time to play at the rate we're going, by all means, play a bit. If it takes you 3 weeks to play what we play in one, take the time. No worries. we'll be here for you. That's one of the great things about podcasts is they're very, you can kind of take them at your own pace, just like the games. Anyway, you have one from somebody else.
Yes, For the Gamer, by the Gamers, by Brevin is how I'm going to say that. Mm-hmm. This is a fantastic podcast. I discovered DGC when I was surfing game-related podcasts and came across Kotaku's Split Screen episode that included an interview with Brett. After diving into the DGC, starting with Final Fantasy IX, I could tell that this was my new favorite podcast. The way they break down games and how they shape games in the modern age is extremely insightful. I was always interested in how games are programmed and how physics work, explained by developers. And this podcast definitely delivers. I have now completely caught up with the cast, and I look forward to more episodes, and can't wait to start playing along. Keep it up, guys. Thank you, Brevin. Yeah.
I'm going to go with it read backwards. I think his real name is Niv Herb.
Good. Okay. I think you've figured it out. Niv
Herb. Yeah, I think it's all code.
Well done, sir.
Thank you. I'm good at that. And then I'll do one last one here by Lacran. He says, "Great podcast. I started listening to this podcast after hearing about it on Kotaku Split Screen and started with the Planescape game, which is the series we just concluded a couple weeks ago. It's been really fun reliving the games of my childhood through these guys. As an adult with 2 small kids, happy Father's Day there, Lacran, a full-time job, and a wife, I find that I'm now more of a collector of video games than an actual gamer." Ooh. Hitting a little close to home there, buddy. I went back and listened to the Legacy of Kain and the Legend of Zelda series, 2 games I have many fond memories of. Keep up the good work. P.S. Did you know you can capture fairies in your bottles? They instant heal you when you die. I got that by email as well. Somebody told me that, and I was like, "Oh,
I did use that. I didn't mention it on there, huh?"
No, I don't think we mentioned it, but
yeah,
I didn't find the net that you need to be able to do.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I did use that a couple of times and forgot to mention it. It's really, that actually is a really cool mechanic in Link Between Worlds as well.
Yeah. And then PPS, I've tried to go back and play Ocarina over the years, having fond memories of playing that game over and over in high school, but I find that N64 games just aged very poorly, especially Link's yells. Did Tim get back to it?
No, not yet. It's still my plan. I'm probably gonna get it on the 3DS version that's 3D enhanced. I do fear that the same thing that's going to happen to me that has been happening to me since it came out. I think it'd probably be my 4th try that I might not finish it, again. It's actually, he brings up a funny thing. I feel like I'm starting to hear this question and debate a bit more lately because, a rumor of virtual console for N64 kind of on the horizon because of the Switch. And I think everyone's starting to ask themselves, other than Mario 64, are those games going to age well? It's like, do people want to play virtual console N64 games? Because I think he's got a point there.
It's funny because the textures are, way blurry.
Oh, visually, not at all, yeah. But
so visually they are a little bit hard to look at. Of course, the polygon counts are really, really tiny. I played the GameCube, and I think it was a little bit enhanced. I can't remember. It was,
yeah. They did.
I think they had sharper textures, but I think they still had the texture... there's texture issues with that, with clipping, I think. Like where the textures start to stretch and blur when they're clipped. That's details. So it doesn't look great. And gameplay-wise, I felt like it held up pretty well. I mean, it felt like a Zelda game. It felt like an early, it felt like the early 3D Zelda game that it was. So it wasn't, I think it was quite as strong as some of the others.
His yells when you swing your sword, though, like over and over again, I feel like.
Yeah.
They're just kind of, they get old. Shut up, Link. You don't have to yell every time you swing a sword.
those things just don't bother me in the least. It's funny, I'm sure there are sounds there are sounds that I really distinctly hate, like the sound of plastic, dropping and falling on like a table or something like that, like a ping pong ball. That is a sound I absolutely hate. But I can listen to Link.
Are we talking about real life or in a game?
Well, if they sourced it for a game, that would also bother me. But Link's yells don't bother me like certain other things do.
Plastic hitting a table.
Yeah,
this is a great. I'm going to use this somehow later in my life.
Yeah, you'll find a way. You're going to set the alarm clock to play an audio sound of ping pong balls being dropped somewhere. Yeah, good. That's good. You'd be a nice host. Anyway, we thank all of our reviewers. Thank you. That was Lachrin. That is your real name. We appreciate every review that we get.
Absolutely.
And helps keep us going. And I've got a handful more, that we're still making our way through, but it won't be long before we'll need more. So go ahead and pop those into your local iTunes. I will get them. If for some reason it's been weeks and weeks and you haven't heard us read it, and you're in a country other than those that I've certainly already read, so U.S., Canada, Germany, etc., go ahead and hit me up. It may be I'm not subscribed to get updates from that particular store. If you're in, say, Botswana, to our Botswana listeners. So just let me know.
That would be cool.
Email to devgameclub@gmail.com. But yeah, we've had lots of interesting ones from all around the world, and that has been great.
Have we heard from our prize winners yet?
Oh, we have not, and I wanted to redraw those. I will do that next time.
Next time. No, we have more prizes coming, but we got to give those out.
We got to get those out, and I do have one person's address, and I still have his thing. He says, I am crunching on a game, which we announced the release.
You're announced, yeah.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Good luck.
Tacoma will be out on August 2nd. And you can pre-order if you're into that as a narrative experience, and not as long as the sorts of games we've been playing on the cast. So it is bite-sized for those who are having trouble finding time to play games in a timely manner. This is more in the a handful of hours type length. There's a lot of interesting stuff in it, and I quite enjoy the game, and I have not gotten bored of it despite playing it again and again and again. So
that's a good sign.
Yep, it's always a good sign. It's good storytelling stuff, and there's always new details that I find, and I'm like, oh, let's go ahead and seen that before. So it's good. In any case, that about does it for our cast this week. For next week, we're going to finish the game. Is that right? I think we're at the end, basically.
That is true. We are we'll tack on Lambda Core and talk about that level, which is really interesting stuff going on there. Some nice moments and a new mechanic, and then we will go to a special place that we will talk a lot about. It's a near perfect shooter.
Our sort of wrap up thing. Yeah, near perfect shooter.
For its era, and its influence on things. That darn special place. And we are working on a guest, and we have good optimism. That's redundant, but we have optimism that that's going to happen. So we won't announce that yet until we have it locked in. But I'm excited.
All right. Well, that sounds good, sir. And I guess that's about it. I am at Brett_Duville on Twitter, and he is
at Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
And, of course, the podcast is at Dev Game Club. And we hope to hear from you soon. Good night, sir.
Good night.
Oh, that reminds me. Our outro music is by Ficus. Check him out. He's at giant_rat on Twitter.
Yay.
Okay, that'll do it.
So you're just going to leave that on there?
I am. I'm just going to throw it in there.
Nice.